My talk today is about establishing Kurdistan region of Iraq as a strong and stable political entity that gains the respect of the international community. We have been talking about, I think this session in particular is about the state of Kurds. And obviously, if Kurds don't establish themselves as a viable entity, a political entity, it will be very difficult for Kurds to be recognized internationally. How do I do this? I need technology. It's okay. Excellent. Okay, so this is the outline of my talk. First of all, my talk is just for Iraq, for the KRG, Kurdistan region. So the first part, I'm going to develop the current model of the socio-political situation of the Kurdistan region. And the second part, I'm going to develop the characteristics of that, and then I recommend and I conclude. First of all, just to make sure we are all agree what we're talking about, just in case I came to a wrong conference. We're talking about Iraq, and that's where Iraq is in the region. It's very important. Iraq is a very important part of that region because it is like it has been always a buffer zone between two different cultures, two different religions, two different languages, and so on. And Kurds always been part of that. It's also important to recognize that in Kurdistan, even if it is just like the current Kurdistan region, it's a very prosperous and it's a very rich place for different ethnic and religious people. And that's important when we are talking about human rights and we are talking about establishing Kurdistan as a viable entity, because respecting them is very, very important. And we must not forget that Kurds in any part could influence other Kurds in other parts, and that's very, very important. And I think if the KRG, which is like leading now, if can establish itself as a viable entity, I think it will create a blueprint or a model for others. So this is why the KRG is very, very important, I believe. First of all, it's if we cannot, for our first attempt ever in the history to establish a state in that environment, if we cannot establish themselves as a viable entity, it will be very difficult to convince other parts. And also, where other parts of Kurdistan, like say in Syria, in Turkey, in Iran, are going to devolve, and there's no doubt the region is changing, its trouble is going to devolve. And if KRG is not providing that model that they can copy, it will be very difficult for them also, so it won't be helpful. And let us not forget the KRG is very powerful in Iraq, and after 2003, when the government of Saddam Hussein ousted, the Kurds, the Iraqi Kurds, are one of the pillars, if the Shia is the other one, because Sunni were absent in that arena in 2003. Kurds can be very influential in Iraq. Okay. I have developed, this is the physical model of a socio-political entity in Iraq. This is a very important picture. What it shows that Kurdistan is two geographical regions. One is run by KDP, and the other one is run by PUK. And you can, these are the real ruler, the real power is within these boxes. And there's a strategic agreement between the leaders of these two groups, whatever you call them, in order to run Kurdistan. Of course, KDP is not strong in the PUK region, but I believe KDP is ruling PUK region through PUK, if that makes sense. The other important point about this to make is these are really the real power. We have elections, it's true, but it's nothing. Today, even if we take the elected government, elected parliament, and also opposition out, nothing will happen in Kurdistan. Yeah. So even if you take all the elected parts, take the government out, take the parliament out, the opposition out, they will still rule. So even if you fight in Kurdistan for the parliament, for the government, you have already lost, because it has no power. And that situation needs to be changed. I talk about geographical locations of these. Of course, this is the green. I know it's all yellow here. This is the green, and that line separates between them. This is PUK region, that's ADP region. So what I've shown you was a physical model. This is the logical. This is the logical model of that physical model. The logical model shows that we have executive power through the security and intelligence services, media and religious and ideology rules everywhere. That's the model. Okay, what's the characteristic of this? What we are seeing today? Okay, let us. I have probably a couple of slides. The first one, I will talk about control of the political system. Of course, the separation of power does not exist, but that's natural because if you have all the powers within like a political group, a clan, whatever you call it, the separation of power will disappear, and that is not a viable solution for the region. And of course, the political groups and the clan, whatever you call it, is a vehicle to achieve that. Centralized. All the powers are centralized. You like it or not. Even if you have like employ a civil servant, it goes to the top in order to have a decree or to have an order for him to get a job. Rule of minorities, of course, it's no doubt minorities were rules. And then you always hear in the media, and they would try to glorify the ruling elite in order to justify the rule. My second slide on this. Control of the society. There's no doubt there are civil society, there are organizations, but it's all controlled to some degree or another. Politicizing citizenship. I think the concept of citizenship does not exist. People are loyal to a political group. Reducing society to a political group. I think in that attempt, one can argue that the society will be reduced to that structure I have shown you. And there are no institutions like democratic institutions like, I don't know, like all these institutions we see in the Western world. And of course, conflict and instability become one of the marks of the society. And how that can be achieved, I think that's a very important question. And of course, the finance and economy will have an important role in that. The official figures of civil servants in Kurdistan is 1.2 million people. If you take a population of 3.5 to 4 million people, women, children, I don't know, adult, and so on, that figure will probably be, I would say, the majority of the workforce. So effectively, everyone in Kurdistan works for the same employer. And you know how the power of that employer now, because if you don't vote for him, he will sack you. And that's not a very healthy environment. And that's what centralizing employment is. And by the way, that 1.2 million, that's an official figure. I haven't made it up. Is only civil servants that directly report to the authorities, not people working for companies owned either by the authorities or by people close to them. Okay, so this is the model. You have this, you have a political elite through all these ruling, and then the society in a way turns into that, which is not healthy. So if you look at any institution, whether it's parliament, government, education, mosques, whatever, that structure will appear. In a way, the society becomes that. So it will be very difficult to have creation or creativity. Okay, well, what I recommend is important. The first thing, the powers need to separate. I know there's parliament, there's government, and also there is judiciary, but now all mixed, or they are like they have no power. It's vital for them to be elected and to be separated. Now the president of Kurdistan and the parliament and the judiciary and also executive power, which is the government, is all mixed up. Because these are elected and this one is elected. And the president of Kurdistan have every power. Have power of judiciary, have a power executive, and also can reject law, can legislate law, and so on. And that's a very confusing situation. Okay? And it's important to facilitate, maybe by law, okay, environment for the opposition to flourish. Instead of opposition try to get into that little tiny box there, which has no power, it has to be right there, helping. Of course, judiciary is vital. Judiciary, now is part of the government, part of the authority. And by government, I don't mean state, I simply mean government. And I have shown those two boxes. Those two boxes mainly, there are a lot of small boxes in those two boxes that they have the power of judiciary, and they shouldn't. That's what you do. You make sure the judiciary is independent and stand as a separate power from the others, and that is not interfered with. Okay? And it is also important for the judiciary professionals to be independent politically, not the way it works now. You have to belong to a political group in order to become a judge. That doesn't work. And there are many organizations and bodies that they have a functional judiciary, such as Parastan, such as the Zgaizaniari, such as Terror, and so on. The list will go on. We don't have time here. But they must not have the judiciary function. Yeah.
Talk to the microphone, please.
Okay.
And we have 5 minutes.
That's plenty of time. Okay. And it's not, judiciary wouldn't work if the region is militarized. You have to demilitarize the society in order for judiciary function. They go hand by hand. When everybody is part of some sort of armed group or militant group or somebody's guards, and nobody knows whose role is, and that is really when the confusion starts. So you have to reduce the security forces into a manageable size, and they must be placed under the government. The elected government knows those two boxes, this little box here, but you have to push it up, and that's vital. Okay? And now the political groups, the clans, they all have intelligence services and, I don't know, militia, so on. They have to be eliminated if you want to establish yourself as a viable entity in the region. Finance is vital. Without finance, that machine we have seen is not going to function. And how do you do that? I believe you start from first liberalizing the economic and finance. Maybe you start with oil. You create many small functions, and government only regulate the economy and finance, not control it, not create companies, not people belonging to clans and authorities, create all these different companies in order to rule. The economy, finance has to be independent. It has to be a power on its own. And you have to make sure there are no firms owned by all these different members of the elite ruling political groups. Civil servants. Having the entire people working for the government is not healthy. You simply kill creativity, and you're not going to allow the region to flourish. You have to create private companies, independent companies, independent finance in order for the region to function. Okay, so you have this, and I already talked about these. So this is probably a more healthier model, where you have the three powers in the middle, and you have others. You have others around, independent. And I've been talking a lot about civil society. By civil society, I mean, for example, if you take the UK, when the government probably makes a decision about homeless people, Shelter will have an input to that. Shelter is not a decision-making group, but they can help the decision. By that I mean the civil societies work closely with the authority in order to run the affairs of the society. Establishing rule of law, it's vital for all those ethnic groups I've shown and everybody else to be equal. And you have to honor those. I think if you want to be respected in the national arena, and of course media is vital. Now media is a military tool, or it's a political tool in order to control. That has to disappear. And of course economy, I've already talked about it. I think I have. So I leave with that statement. That's my last statement. The only way for Kurdistan to establish herself as a strong political entity and to pursue the rights of self-determination is to build a democratic civil society that is based on freedom and rule of law. And thank you for your attention.